Okay. So another concept that's going to become important in how we talk about later things as well is the concept of hierarchical progressions. So in development, we talk about how early areas of development build upon each other to continue to move along development. So this is important because if we understand how behaviors and how development builds upon each other, you can see where potential breakdowns are. And so, an example that we, especially us child psychologists, really like to use is play. And so, play begins with sensory exploration. And so, again, you're using your senses to make sense of your world. And so that's where you start. And that's why a lot of times babies, for example, everything goes in their mouth, or they're looking at things really carefully, or they're touching and feeling. They're using their senses to make sense of their world. This then, once you understand again how the world is and how you interact with it and those effects back and forth, builds into functional play. And so this is kind of that pre-academic play where you start to recognize attributes. So things like colors, categorization, putting puzzles together, and understanding again that level above just understanding what something is. It's how it works together. That then progresses to symbolic play, where something can take the place of another. So, for example, your spoon isn't just a spoon, it's also a plane. And so, as you can see, that's one more step beyond just understanding the physical attributes, figuring out how it works in conjunction with something, but also then imbuing it with life. This then leads into social play, which is your ability to role play, for example, and to take on the thoughts and feelings of others. So, one of the reasons why us psychologists go on and on about play so much is this is actually the way that children learn theory of mind. So, theory of mind is that understanding of how others think and that they have different thoughts, feelings, and experiences than you. So when you see your parent or another adult doing something, you take on that persona and you try it on, just like you try on a costume. And you're seeing, again, things through their eyes and you're understanding how all those things fit together. And that's where that social piece comes from. But as you can see, sometimes an individual can get stuck in one of those stages and doesn't move on kind of to get to that top of where this should be leading. Communication is another really good example for this. For example, communication starts with communicative intent. So understanding that you can have an effect on someone else. And then the motor planning to be able to make certain sounds. And then the memory that certain sounds mean certain things because language is very abstract. And then once you put all those things together, knowing the social context that communication is for. As we know, communication doesn't always work in every single situation. You have to shift your behaviors. And so you can see how that social piece gets woven into every single part of development. But that, again, you can see those breakdowns sometimes that may be getting in a person's way and being able to kind of put all these things come together. And so understanding all of these things also helps us understand where are behaviors coming from? Why does an individual engage in certain things? Because nothing happens in a vacuum. And understanding these from a basic part helps us be able to put those together again to say what is causing a problem or a block for this individual. So this is probably the most complex part of the presentation that we have today. This is called the pyramid of learning. And what we really like about this, which is all the way back, it came all the way back from 1991, is an understanding of how we, again, use hierarchical progressions to continue to move forward in development. So as you can see, on the bottom of this pyramid is the central nervous system. And then on the top of it is academic learning, or the intellectual cognitive part of how everything comes together. So you can see again, when we were talking before about neuropsychological underpinnings, we were talking about development in general. With autism spectrum disorder, because it is a neurodevelopmental disorder, there are many things neuropsychologically and neurologically that get thrown off that often will lead to more problems. And just like with building a house, if you don't have a strong foundation, you can see that there's going to be more difficulties the higher up you go. Excuse me. So our central nervous system is lies on top of or lies below our sensory systems. Our sensory system is the way that we take in information from our environment and make sense of it, and how we can interact with the world accurately, as well as efficiently. Sensory processing is also the basis of regulation. So being able to be in a state of not of being efficient, for example, and not being either overstimulated or having too many things go on, or understimulated where you need to do things to kind of wake yourself up. Many of us take these things for granted because our nervous system works the way that it's supposed to, and we don't have to worry about filtering things out or getting more sensory information in. And so, even from a sensory perspective, this is one of the reasons why it's one of the symptoms of autism spectrum disorder. It's often one of the first things that parents notice. My child moves more than they should, or they get overwhelmed more than they should, such as like with sounds or with touch, or they're constantly moving and seeking those things out. So when your nervous system isn't working the way that it's supposed to, again, your body isn't as efficient. And so you use more energy for the things that should come naturally. And so this is, again, just that bottom part. And we haven't even kind of gotten into some of the other parts that go into it. So sensory motor development is that next part that lies on top of sensory processing. So again, being able to put things together, being able to, for example, understand where you are in space, being able to understand the two sides of your body and how they work together. Something that I forgot to mention earlier is that most people are familiar with the five senses. So your sense of hearing, vision, sound, touch, taste, and then occupational therapists talk a lot about these other two systems, vestibular and proprioceptive. And so again, the movement of your head through space is vestibular, and proprioception is understanding where you are in space. And so again, these are all the basis for regulation. And so on top of that, then making sense, just like we were talking about in play. So you go from making sense of your world through your senses to then understanding then how you interact with your world. And then as you go up, you can see then you start building in more processes. So starting to do hand-eye coordination. As you can see, this is going to be more important for things like being able to do activities of daily living, like brushing your teeth. Also at school, being able to write, being able to catch a ball, doing these things that we, again, typically expect children to be able to do without needing a lot of effort. And then that goes up again into the cognitive and intellectual part where everything comes together, your sensory systems, and your motor abilities. And then we start adding in the social piece, because there are times when the activity of daily living should be done this way, and then times when it should be done another way. The same thing with behavior. If you're not regulated, and again, if you are less efficient, you're using more energy, it's kind of like you have a less efficient car engine in a lot of ways. And so we have some people cruising down the highway in their Priuses getting 55 miles a gallon. And then there are some who, again, because there's a lot more going on for them, are more like Suburbans getting 12 miles a gallon. But everyone has the same gas tank. And so that's why at the end of the day, you can be in very different spaces depending on what's been going on. We all feel this as well. When we've had a really hard day, how we come home can be very different, especially if we have something like a cold or something else is going on. And so even when it comes to things like your nervous system and understanding like your sensory things, there is no getting away from sensory input. And so that can be very overwhelming and take a lot of energy for children. So why is this all important? Because academic learning is all the way on the top. And again, this is how, again, most children this is what they're expected to be able to do. But research has shown us time and time again that learning takes place best in a place of joy. And so if you're already, again, your gas tank is going down really, really fast, and because you're not as efficient, going through things like school, where you're expected to learn new things basically every day, is going to be a lot harder. So making sure that a child is regulated or an individual is regulated helps them be more available to learn, as well as to do all of the things that don't come as naturally. So the social pieces and how everything fits together. When we were talking about communication earlier, we kind of emphasized how there are many, many component pieces to things, again, that we take for granted. We feel this, I think, a lot when we try to learn another language and we realize, okay, like, just making the sound sometimes is just hard enough, not to mention putting everything together and making sure that it makes sense to the other person. Okay, so when you're not dysregulated, this is what leads to those difficulties with those restricted and repetitive behaviors. And because, again, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, this is why restricted and repetitive behaviors are part of the criteria for autism. We often see a lot of the RRBs that we see, such as preoccupations, sensory sensitivities, rigidities. A lot of them are also an individual attempting to regulate themselves or take control over a situation to, again, make the inefficiencies in their system, cut out the things that aren't as important. If you can control everything, you know how to anticipate it, that takes less energy. And then, of course, we always need to refill our gas tanks. And so you will go towards things that you really like, you're very good at, and that is going to refill your gas tank.